And Leroy, is it just that we're paying more attention to all of these stories now? Or has something happened in the last couple of months that means there is a greater degree of crime in this country than we've seen for a long time?
Well, crime trends will always peak and trough, but there's been a stubborn increase in violent crime over a number of years, and it's not going down. I think it's because we're not really getting to the causes of these crimes. These sort of violent crimes don't happen overnight in most cases. And now and again, you get drastic change in someone's behaviour and they commit the most horrendous crimes overnight. But most of these cases build, so it's a question of spotting these worrying signs early enough. And when you've got enough assets, police assets, to respond to these calls in a more prevention and intervention way, you can spot these people who are showing tendencies to use weapons and deal with their differences by using violence. So there is a worrying trend, but we need to get a more preventative and intervention approach to reducing it, and not just responding from one violent case to another. And I suppose a lot of the issues is accessibility to weapons, in particular guns, because shootings are on the increase, and that is very worrying.
So this preventative approach that perhaps hasn't been taking so much precedence in recent years, this is about getting more officers out onto the streets. I wonder, in policy terms, how is that achieved? I'm looking back over the last decade or so. There's been politicians crowing about reducing the number of backroom workers to increase the number of frontroom or out on the street policemen. And I suppose, to some extent, that may have been counterproductive. If you get rid of a lot of the backroom staff, it's the frontline police officers who have to fill in all the forms, who have to actually spend too much time in the backrooms themselves.
Well, that's the problem. Through austerity over the last 10 to 12 years, it's really cut into not only the flesh on the bones, but into the marrow of the infrastructure of policing and other public services. So that citizens-focused officers, especially on the Safer Neighbour teams, have been absolutely reduced significantly, maybe a third of what they were before. That they are not getting the sort of opportunities to build relationships with families and, certain areas where they're not as functional as they should be, certain crime hotspots. All of these places where you need to have officers building relationships, getting information, and, as I said, a lot more proactive in responding in a preventative way. So we're seeing...
And yet there were police cuts in 2010 and 2011, and crime went down. Crime continued to go down until about halfway through the last decade, especially in London. It sort of turned around the time of 2016. For 5 years, there did seem to be a way to do more with less. What, in your view, is something that changed then? Was it something to do with stop and search? Was it to do with attitudes? Or is it simply that funding takes time to have an effect?
I think it's all of that. It took time for as I said, cut into the marrow of the infrastructure so that you weren't getting a total decimation of the citizen-focused officers as we now find. And then they realised this, the politicians, the Home Office, etc., and they're trying to build back up to the numbers they lost. Over 40,000 police personnel back hall, as well as front-focused citizens-focused officers. So we need to build back up those numbers. And, of course, it's not just about the numbers, it's getting the right officers who've got the skills and the experience to build those relationships back up with communities so that people are telling you what's happening in their communities and not just seeing it as grassing on their mates, but actually informing officers to make safer and more secure neighbourhoods.